The San Antonio Spurs just slammed the door on the Minnesota Timberwolves, and now the matchup the entire basketball world has been waiting for is officially set. The defending champion Oklahoma City Thunder are standing on the other side like the NBA's final boss, undefeated so far in these playoffs, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander leading the attack, and that terrifying defense suffocating everybody in sight. Fans across the league have spent the whole season waiting for someone to finally expose OKC, but nobody has managed to do it yet. Now San Antonio walks into the picture with absolutely zero fear, and honestly, that should make the Thunder pay attention. On the other side is Victor Wembanyama, and a Spurs team that most people thought was still years away from truly competing. Apparently nobody inside that locker room got the memo, because this group just bulldozed through a Minnesota team that reached back-to-back Western Conference Finals. Even crazier, they made it look easier than anybody expected. Game 6 did not feel like a nervous young roster barely hanging on in a hostile environment. It looked like a team that already believes it belongs on the biggest stage in basketball. San Antonio walked into Minnesota and handed the Timberwolves a brutal 30-point blowout in their own building. That is the kind of statement veteran contenders are supposed to make. Not one of the youngest teams left in the postseason. That is why this no longer feels like a someday story for the Spurs. It feels like right now. The biggest concern surrounding San Antonio all season was never talent. Nobody questioned that. The concern was whether such a young group could survive playoff pressure when everything tightened up. Eventually, people assumed the inexperience would show. The bright lights would get too heavy. The mistakes would pile up. That narrative survived for a while. In round 1, the Spurs handled Portland comfortably. Then Minnesota pushed them into uncomfortable moments. Game 1 slipped away after Julian Champagny missed a wide-open 3 at the buzzer. Game 4 turned chaotic when Wembanyama got ejected early, allowing the Wolves to even the series. Suddenly, everybody started wondering if the Spurs were about to unravel emotionally. Instead, Wembanyama responded exactly the way superstars do. He came into Game 5 looking aggressive, locked in, and completely finished with hearing the noise around him. He dominated the game, flipped the momentum of the series back towards San Antonio, and reminded everybody why he's already one of the scariest players in basketball. But the real test still waited ahead. Closing out a playoff series on the road in Minnesota is not supposed to be easy, especially for a young roster. The Timberwolves crowd was desperate to force a Game 7, and those situations usually expose inexperienced teams. Young players rush shots, commit turnovers, and let the environment overwhelm them. San Antonio did the exact opposite, and Stephon Castle completely erased every remaining doubt about this franchise's future. The second-year guard walked into the biggest game of his career and looked completely fearless. Castle exploded for 32 points, 11 rebounds, and 6 assists, while shooting 11 for 16 from the field. He attacked the rim confidently, controlled the pace, made smart reads, and played with the kind of composure you usually only see from seasoned veterans. That performance changed the conversation around this team, because now Oklahoma City is not preparing for a fun young story anymore. They are preparing for a confident Spurs squad that already believes its championship window is open right now. Then Stephon Castle took things to another level by catching fire from deep. He knocked down 5 of his 7 3-point attempts and finished the night as a ridiculous plus 28 in limited minutes. That is not the kind of performance people describe with "he'll be good someday." That is superstar-level playoff basketball happening right now in real time. And honestly, every game makes the hype around Castle feel more justified. The tools were always obvious. He has the strong frame to bully defenders, the ability to get downhill whenever he wants, and the toughness to impact games even when the shot is not falling. He rebounds like a forward, competes defensively on every possession, and consistently makes smart decisions with the ball. But the one thing people questioned was always the jumper. Could teams simply sag off him and dare him to shoot? That strategy suddenly looks dangerous. 5 made threes against a Minnesota team that has spent the last 2 seasons living deep in the playoffs changes the conversation completely. Castle looked comfortable, confident, and completely unfazed by the pressure of a closeout game on the road. And this was not just one random explosion either. Throughout the postseason, Castle has quietly been averaging 16, 7 points and 4 assists per game while posting an efficient 52% effective field goal percentage. Sure, the turnovers still show up occasionally, But when a player impacts winning in this many ways, those mistakes stop feeling like a fatal flaw and start looking more like normal growing pains for a future star. Then there's Dylan Harper, which somehow makes San Antonio's future look even scarier. Remember, this is a rookie. Not just his first playoff run, his first NBA season ever. And somehow he already looks built for high-pressure basketball. Harper has been giving the Spurs nearly 12 points per game off the bench while shooting an incredibly efficient 55% effective field goal percentage. That kind of production from a rookie guard in playoff basketball is rare. What really stands out is how calm he looks. Most young players enter the postseason trying not to make mistakes. Harper is not playing scared at all. He handles the ball with confidence, gets to his spots naturally, and already moves with polished footwork that looks years ahead of schedule. He rebounds hard, stays active defensively, and keeps making smart reads instead of forcing bad shots. In Game 6, he dropped 15 points off the bench on 6-4-8 shooting and looked completely comfortable despite the hostile environment. And here's the scary part for opposing teams. Harper is leading all playoff bench players in scoring. That changes everything for San Antonio because now opponents cannot even relax when the starters go to the bench. The Spurs keep attacking in waves, and Harper has quietly become one of the biggest breakout stories of the entire postseason. And while all this young talent grabs headlines, De'Aaron Fox still matters in a huge way. Some people are acting like Fox suddenly became irrelevant because of Wembanyama and the young core, but that could not be further from the truth. Even through some inconsistent playoff stretches, Fox continues to provide exactly what San Antonio needs: speed, shot creation, veteran composure, and the ability to completely change a game with his pace alone. That balance between young stars exploding and proven veterans steadying the team is exactly why the Spurs suddenly look much more dangerous than anybody expected. De'Aaron Fox has quietly become one of the biggest reasons the Spurs suddenly look like a real championship threat. Throughout the playoffs, he's been a veteran stabilizer, holding everything together while the younger players explode into bigger roles around him. And in Game 6, Fox reminded everybody exactly why San Antonio traded for him in the first place. He finished with 21 points and 9 assists, while shooting a ridiculous 8 for 10 from the field. That kind of efficiency in a closeout game completely changes a series, because once Fox starts getting downhill and controlling tempo, the Spurs' offense becomes almost impossible to contain. Defenses already have to worry about Victor Wembanyama at the rim, Castle attacking from a wing, and Harper carving up second units. Add an aggressive Fox on top of that, and suddenly there are problems everywhere. That's why the whole three-guard problem conversation feels premature. People keep acting like San Antonio will eventually have to choose between Fox, Castle, and Harper. But right now the trio looks terrifying together. In Game 6 alone, they combined for 68 points while shooting an absurd 25-4-34 from the field. Minnesota threw different coverages at them all night, and none of it worked. Every time the Wolves adjusted to one guard, another one immediately took over the game. That's what makes the Spurs so dangerous. If one guard gets hot, they're tough to stop. If two of them get rolling together, defenses start scrambling. But when all three are clicking at once like they did in Minnesota, teams get completely overwhelmed. The floor opens up, transition opportunities explode, and suddenly even elite defenses look helpless. And the biggest reason this entire system works is Victor Wembanyama. Normally, running this many guards together would create major defensive problems. Teams would attack the lack of size, hunt mismatches, and live at the rim. But San Antonio isn't built like a normal team because Wemby changes every defensive rule. It honestly feels like he counts as two defenders by himself. The Spurs' defensive formula is almost unfairly simple. Wembanyama protects the paint while everybody else pressures the perimeter like crazy. Castle, Fox, and Harper can gamble defensively, jump passing lanes, and aggressively chase shooters because they know there's a 7-foot for alien waiting behind them to erase mistakes. That safety net changes everything. Most teams have to play carefully because one missed rotation turns into an easy layup. The Spurs don't have that fear. Wembanyama blocks shots, alters drives, and scares players away from the basket before they even attack. That freedom allows San Antonio to play faster, more physical, and more aggressive than almost anybody left in the playoffs. It also hides roster weaknesses that would normally hurt contenders. the Spurs still don't have the perfect power forward next to Wemby. Every championship team wants that ideal two-way forward who can switch defensively, rebound, stretch the floor, and guard bigger bodies. San Antonio would obviously love to have that player too. But Wembanyama's defensive impact covers up so many flaws that the Spurs can survive without perfect roster balance right now. And honestly, that's what should have Oklahoma City paying attention heading into this series. Because this isn't some young team sneaking through the bracket anymore. The Spurs already look comfortable under playoff pressure. They've got elite guard play, one of the best defenses in basketball, multiple shot creators, and a superstar who completely changes the geometry of the court on both ends. That combination is real. The Thunder may still be the favorites, but San Antonio doesn't look intimidated at all. They just walked into Minnesota, crushed a veteran playoff team by 30 on the road, and looked like they expected to do it. That's a completely different level of confidence for a group this young. And if Castle keeps shooting like this, Fox keeps controlling games, Harper keeps playing beyond his years, and Wemby keeps looking like the future face of basketball, Oklahoma City might be walking into a much tougher series than anybody expected. Normally, a lineup built around this many guards would get bullied by bigger front courts. That's supposed to be the weakness. Bigger teams crash the glass, dominate the paint, and force smaller lineups into impossible matchups. But the Spurs don't operate under normal basketball rules anymore because Victor Wembanyama changes the entire equation by himself. You could see it all over Game 6. Wembanyama finished with 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 blocks. And somehow those numbers almost felt quiet compared to the standard he's already created. That's how ridiculous his impact has become. But the real story showed up when you looked at what happened to Minnesota's front court. Rudy Gobert finished the elimination game with 0 points, 3 rebounds, and 0 blocks. Julius Randle was even worse, scoring just 3 points on 1 for 8 shooting, while ending the night as a brutal minus 34. Minnesota's starting front court basically vanished in the biggest game of their season. That's not just good defense. That's complete destruction. And the craziest part about Wembanyama's impact is that the blocks are only half the story. Sure, the highlights are insane. He pins shots against the glass, erases layups out of nowhere, and makes players look terrified to even test him at the rim. But a massive part of what he does never shows up in the stat sheet at all. It's the fear. Players see him standing near the paint and instantly start changing their decisions. Floaters get rushed. Layups get thrown too high off the glass. Drivers hesitate at the last second and kick the ball back out instead of attacking. Entire offenses start warping themselves around avoiding one player. That's the real Wemby effect. Teams aren't getting clean looks at the basket anymore. Even when somebody scores against them inside, it usually feels like they had to hit the toughest shot imaginable just to survive the possession. Nothing comes easy. Every drive feels uncomfortable. Every paint touch feels crowded. And over the course of a playoff series, that pressure slowly breaks teams apart. Then you look at what happens when Wembanyama shares the floor with Stephon Castle, and it gets even scarier. During these playoffs, the Spurs have posted a ridiculous plus 25 net rating when those two are on the court together. Their defensive rating in those minutes sits at an absurd 96. For those are championship-level numbers. That's why this no longer feels like one of those maybe in 3 years rebuilding stories. San Antonio's defense is already capable of wrecking elite teams right now. Wembanyama gives the Spurs freedom to play ultra-aggressive everywhere else because everybody knows he's waiting behind them as the ultimate safety net. If somebody gets beat off the dribble, Wemby is there. If a rotation gets blown, Wemby is there. If the offense somehow survives the first wave of pressure, they still have to challenge a 7-foot monster waiting at the rim. No other team in basketball has a defensive weapon that completely reshapes the floor the way he does. And honestly, that's what makes the Spurs so terrifying heading into the next round. They didn't just beat Minnesota. They controlled the series in a way that surprised almost everybody watching. When people hear Spurs in 6, it sounds like a competitive back-and-forth series that barely tilted one direction. But that's not really what happened here. Minnesota's 2 wins came from a missed buzzer-beater 3 in Game 1 and the chaotic Game 4, where Wembanyama got ejected early. Outside of that, San Antonio looked like the better team for most of the matchup. And that realization should have the rest of the league paying very close attention. Outside of those two moments, San Antonio looked like the team fully controlling the series from start to finish. Honestly, this matchup felt much closer to Spurs in 5 than Spurs in 6 because of how consistently they dictated the pace, the physicality, and the confidence level on the floor. Game 6 was the perfect example. The Spurs walked into Minnesota's building and completely humiliated the Timberwolves on their home court. They won by 30, led by as many as 37, and never trailed for a single second. In a closeout playoff game on the road, the Wolves never seriously threatened them. That's not a young team barely surviving postseason pressure. That's a young team announcing itself to the entire NBA. And the scary part was how comfortable they looked doing it. San Antonio never played like a group hoping they belonged on this stage. They played like a team that already knew it belonged there. Every time Minnesota tried to create momentum, the Spurs answered instantly. Stephon Castle would bury a 3. De'Aaron Fox would get downhill and score with ease. Victor Wembanyama would erase somebody at the rim and kill the crowd's energy in one possession. Just like that, the Wolves' momentum disappeared before it even had time to build. That's the part that should completely change the conversation around the Spurs team. Minnesota wasn't some inexperienced playoff squad happy to be there. This is a veteran group that's battled through deep postseason runs against elite competition. They've played in hostile environments. They've handled pressure. They've survived high-stakes moments before. And somehow San Antonio made them look like the inexperienced team searching for answers. That's what feels so shocking about this entire playoff run. The Spurs are not supposed to look this calm, disciplined, and confident yet. They're supposed to be the young team learning lessons the hard way and taking playoff punches before eventually breaking through in a few years. Instead, they look like the team fully in command, while Minnesota spent most of the series reacting to them. Which brings us to the next question everybody's asking now. What does this mean for Oklahoma City? Because this is where things start getting very serious. Spurs versus Thunder, the defending champions, the undefeated playoff powerhouse. The team everybody has spent the entire season watching and waiting for anyone to finally crack. That's what happens when a team dominates the league this completely. Fans eventually start rooting for chaos. They want to see the giant finally get tested. And now San Antonio arrives as the unexpected challenger nobody fully believed in at first. The future team that suddenly looks ready right now. The young squad people thought was still years away from championship basketball. Except now they've already eliminated Minnesota. And they also happen to be the one team that consistently made Oklahoma City uncomfortable all season long. The Spurs went 4-1 against the Thunder during the regular season. 4 wins, 1 loss. And these were meaningless games where OKC rested stars or coasted through the schedule. San Antonio genuinely gave them problems. The Spurs' length, aggressive perimeter defense, and Wembanyama's ability to completely wreck OKC's driving lanes created matchup issues the Thunder never fully solved. That's why this series suddenly feels way more dangerous than people expected. Oklahoma City is still the favorite for a reason. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is playing unbelievable basketball. The Thunder defend at an elite level, and they've looked almost untouchable throughout the playoffs. But San Antonio is no longer playing with house money. This team believes it can win the West right now. And honestly, after what they just did to Minnesota, it's getting harder to argue against them.